Good morning, everybody, and welcome in. We're glad that you're joined in with us, and we hope that wherever you are and whoever you have there with you as we're worshiping together, that you're safe, that you're blessed, that you're able to enjoy this time of collective worship with people you love and with your church family, even though we can't all be in the same place right now. I got to tell you, nobody would have planned this. This isn't something that we ever could have guessed or expected. This isn't something that we could have anticipated in any way. But we're trying to make the very best of it. And you know what? Even though I would love so much for us to all be in the same place and lifting our voices and song together and praising God together and worshiping together and be able to enjoy a firm handshake once again and a good hug and a high five. And even though we can't have those things, we have this opportunity right now. And for that, I'm very grateful. I'm glad that we live in a time and a place and a situation where even if we can't be in the same building, we can worship God together. And it means so much to me that we have you here and that together we're able to open up the Word of God and to enjoy this time in the Word. I invite you to open up with me. We're going to be in Acts chapter 8. Acts chapter 8 is where we're going to be taking a look this morning. Now, you know what? I know that this isn't the way we would normally go about it. When we planned our series of lessons that we are entering into right now, we weren't anticipating the circumstance and situation that we're in right now. And so we've made some changes. And generally what we would do is we would have our morning in the Word Bible study, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We would have our one chapter a day of reading that we would be doing together. And we'd come together on Sunday and we'd have our sermon and our Bible class from that. But this week we're going to take a little deviation from that. And we're going to address some things that are going on in our world. And a theme, a title, an idea that I think is something very timely and something that we could really learn from. We've all had this experience. In fact, right now we're living this experience, and it's this. There are moments in our life that drastically change everything that we had anticipated. A week ago, a month ago, what did you think today would be like? A month ago, what were you planning this Sunday morning? You were probably planning to be in the church like everybody else. You were planning to see your friends and family there. You were planning on singing together and taking communion together and hearing a sermon together and trying to stay awake for it. It's okay. Go ahead and laugh at that. There's no wrong with a little humor. You were probably, like me, planning on coming back Sunday and packing up so that you could head out of town on spring break because you had big plans in anticipation of all kinds of wonderful festivities and things that you were going to be a part of. And you know what? All that's changed. At least for most of us, all that's changed. Everything's different. We're not meeting where we thought we were. We're not doing what we thought we'd be doing. We're not looking at a week ahead that we thought we were going to be looking at. Because there comes a point sometimes in our lives when something takes place that just changes everything that we had anticipated and everything we had planned. And so this morning, I want us to think about, what do you do? What do you do when you get in a situation where everything changes what you thought you were going to be doing? The future that you had thought, the trajectory that you had planned for, the month ahead, 2 months ahead, 3 months ahead, a year ahead that you had anticipated, you suddenly get in this moment where you go, that's not going to happen the way I thought it was going to happen. What do we do when the future is not what we thought it was? Here's what we often want to do. We immediately have this desire to say, how can I get back to normal as fast as possible? How can I get back to what I expected as fast as possible? How can I get the pieces back in the box the way I always thought they would be that have spilled out all over the place? And how can I get back to normal? And here's what I want to suggest to you. There are moments in our life that we don't get back to normal, at least not the normal that we anticipated. And what I want to say is that just because something can't get back to normal, just because something has drastically changed, doesn't mean that God can't bring a blessing about in it. Doesn't mean that it can't still be a good thing. Just because it's not what we had expected or even, frankly, what we had wanted, doesn't mean that it can't still be good. Here's the phrase. Just because it can't go back to normal doesn't mean it can't still be blessed. And so this morning I want us to talk about that. You know, a moment like that happened in Acts chapter 8. In Acts chapter 8, we have this moment where everything that they had planned, everything they anticipated, the world as they knew it, the early church, had drastically changed. Up to this point, you got to remember that the early church was a kind of an idyllic situation to be in. It was kind of this amazing circumstance. You had people from all these different ethnicities and all these diverse backgrounds and from all these nationalities, and they came together and they had this beautiful, perfect harmony. The people who were in need were provided for by those who had an abundance. Everyone had all things in common. It's a joyous situation. Every day they're together in their homes, they're in the temple courts, they're praising God, they're worshiping together, they're taking care of each other's needs, they're looking out for each other's poor. It's just a beautiful, beautiful picture. And in so many ways we look at that and think, well, that's the norm that they had been accustomed to. That's the norm that they had expected. And they just expected that trajectory to continue on. And something happened in chapter 8 that suddenly changed all that. And they were looking ahead and saying, we're probably not ever going to get back to this again. We're not going to get back to this normal. And now the question becomes, can the future still be blessed, even though it's so drastically different from what we had expected or anticipated? You're already opened up, I'm sure, to Acts chapter 8. Acts chapter 8, let's take a look at these first couple of verses together. Of course, you'll remember that it ends on the tail end of chapter 7 is the stoning of Stephen, which is the event that's going to cause the trajectory to change. It's the event that takes place. Stephen, the great evangelist, the deacon, this powerful man of God, is drug outside the city. He's stoned until he's dead. And it sparks this enormous problem within the church, this persecution. And here it is, centered around this man named Saul, who we know later to be Paul. And Saul approved of this execution. And there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem, and they were scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Devout men came and buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. But Saul was ravaging the church, and entering house after house, he dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. Suddenly, this great idyllic situation of the early church has been overturned. And no longer is it the normal they had expected. And it's not the next week, next month, and next year that they had hoped for and planned. And the question is God going to be able to somehow bring good about, even in this terrible, terrible circumstance? Their normal was never going to be normal again. But we're going to find that they were able to find that it was still blessed. You know, our world has in some ways experienced a similar change. But it happens in our individual lives as well. Chances are good that you can think about in your past a moment that changed everything moving forward in your future. And I hope that you can look at that moment and you can see how God was able to bring about blessings and good even in the midst of that difficult time. I'll share with you a quick story that I heard this week that I thought was really apropos for this particular idea. And it's a story of a woman, a young woman. She was in high school. Her name was Laura Welch. And Laura Welch was a 17-year-old girl, and she was very popular in school. She was making good grades. She had great friends, and she came from an upper middle class family, had everything that she would want. Her life revolved around the excitement of the new albums that were coming out, the music that was such a big part of her life, and her friends. And one day she was driving in her car with a couple of her girlfriends. And they were listening to a song and they were playing it loud and singing along with it. And she didn't even pay attention or notice that there was a stop sign in front of her. She darted out into the intersection and she smashed a car that was coming on. She had no way of knowing that in that car was her boyfriend. And as fate would have it, she, not paying attention, darted through an intersection, smashed into a car that is being driven by her boyfriend, throwing him through the windshield of that car, and he died. Later in life, she would recount this moment as being one of the darkest moments in her life, and you and I would agree that how in the world can you come back from something like that? That's a moment where everything in her life that she had planned and everything she'd expected, all the anticipation of the future in a moment was suddenly changed. How was Laura going to deal with that? Well, thankfully, Laura was a woman of faith, a young woman who had a faith in God, and her life was shaken, and her life was very much in upheaval for a while. But she doubled down in her relationship with God, and she searched for and found within Him grace and forgiveness, and she found from God a love and an ability to pull herself out of that deep, deep despair that she was in, and to begin to slowly allow God to put the pieces of her life back together. She swore she would never again find someone that she would be in a relationship with, would never trust herself to be in a relationship again, but God was gracious and eventually in time introduced her to a young man. She and this young man, after a slow and gradual process of dating, did fall in love and they did get married. And they were blessed with some wonderful children and they went on to have a very happy home. Well, until her husband's career really took off. And probably too rich, too quick, too successful, too fast. And a man who up to that point had never really connected with his own faith in God. Faith was Laura's business. It really wasn't his. And he was happy for her and the kids to do their thing. But there came a moment in his life as well when a similar kind of event took place. Because he came home one day and Laura was packed and the girls were packed. And said, George, I'm tired of your drinking. I'm tired of the way you've treated us. I'm tired of the way that you've acted in this family, and I've had it. You're going to have to make a decision. You can put away the alcohol. You can get right with God, and you can recommit to this marriage, or we're gone, and we're going to stay gone. And so at that moment, George had a realization that the normal he had been accustomed to, the trajectory of his life, and the way he thought his life was moving could not continue to be the way that it was. And something had to change. And so he did. He put away the alcohol, he changed his life, he recommitted to his marriage, and he grew deeply in the faith that to that point had been something very distant to him. Well, that couple did end up having a successful and happy marriage and continue to this day to be happily married. We don't remember her as Laura Welch, but we do remember him as George Bush. And we know that together they did have a successful life and continue to even now. The story was actually related in a news interview that Laura Bush did a few years ago, where she recounted this very idea of what do you do when you have a moment that changes everything in your world. And she shared openly that her faith got her through that. That it was only through the grace of God that she was able to move on and to find a success. At a moment when your life cannot continue to be the normal you had expected, it takes God to bring a blessing that you could not bring about yourself. And the thing that made the difference for Laura Welch and now Bush, and the thing that made the difference for George, was that when they committed to make that step, they took a step of faith. They took a step in the relationship with Jesus Christ. They took a step that brought them closer to God. Many of us, especially those of us that have kids, we're excited to see that Disney gave the early release of Frozen 2. I had not seen Frozen 2, but excitedly our family got together and watched it as it came out on Disney Plus this past week. And I was touched especially by one particular musical number in there. And one of the female characters talked about the difficulties of life and how you have to process those and move forward in those by doing the next right thing, taking the next right step, doing the next best thing that you can do. You know, when the normal you had expected can't be. The next right step you can take is always your next step that takes you closer to God. The step that takes you deeper in your faith, the step that takes you closer alongside Jesus Christ and allows Him to carry you through the difficulties of that moment. I don't believe that we'll ever, in those situations, get back to normal, put all the pieces back in the box and everything will proceed back the way that we thought it would. But if we'll take the next step in faith, the next step in closeness with God, He can bring about a blessing in those difficulties that we would have never guessed. That's the story of this particular chapter of the early church in Acts chapter 8. Great persecution. The people are devastated. The people are being dragged into prison. The people are being scattered all throughout the countryside, chased out, physically afraid for their very life. And how many of them must have been going along thinking, it can never be the way we expected. Everything's changed. Everything is lost. Everything is hopeless. But what we find is that as they continued to take the next best step, as they continued to do the next best thing, as they continued to give their life to God and walk in faith with Christ, He brought about blessings even in these difficult times. Let's read on in this story. Look at verse 4 with me. Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word. They had to be scattered. They did leave. They didn't have what they had wanted and had they thought and thought they would have. But what did they do? They continued to take the next best step. They continued to do what their faith led them to. They continued to be diligent in their pursuit of a relationship with Jesus Christ. And that meant where they went, they spread the word. Read on. Verse 5, Philip went down to the city of Samaria and proclaimed to them Christ. Philip was scattered from, he was pushed out of the city that he wanted to be in, his home, his place of residence, the place where he was comfortable and where he had always seen the trajectory of his life continue. But he went doing the next best thing, taking the next step of faith. And that meant that he proclaimed to a whole new people the beautiful message of Jesus Christ, and many of them became converts. And his ministry there was very, very effective. And that's exactly what I think is so important about stories like this. When the people of Jerusalem were persecuted, they left, but they left taking with them, doing the next thing, taking that step of faith with Christ and sharing the gospel. When Philip was pushed out, he took the next step, and that was, even in the midst of his difficult moment, to preach the good news. Laura, in her most difficult moment, took the next step of faith and found healing and found grace and found love again. George, when the moment of truth came upon him, he took the step that led him to Christ, and it led him to sobriety, and it led him to a happy marriage, and most importantly, it led him to a relationship with Jesus Christ. These are situations that maybe didn't get back to normal. Maybe they were forever changed, but they were blessed. Because these are examples of people and stories of situations where people reached out into the unknown future ahead and walked boldly with their God. You know, I think that next faith step is a really important concept for us right now. Because I'll be honest, I don't know what next week looks like. I don't know what the week after that looks like, or a month from now. I don't know a year from now how we're going to look back on this and see how drastically our lives are changed. And I have a funny feeling that it's not going to be the normal that we expect. I have a funny feeling that the pieces aren't going to go back in the box the way we had expected them to. But I do believe this. If we will continue to take the next step that draws us closer to Jesus Christ, He can bring a blessing out of this that we can never anticipate. I believe that because Jesus Christ is one who Himself, while in the flesh here on the earth, experienced a moment that changed everything else. And it was a moment when He extended His arms onto a wooden cross, and He allowed nails to be driven into His hands and feet, and He died a gruesome and horrifying death. You know, that's a moment you look at it and say, you don't come back from that. You don't just move forward from that. Everything changes there. And yes, everything does change there. But you see, the reason that you and I can look at a tomorrow and a next week and a next month and a next year that's uncertain and say, I don't know how, but I know it's going to have blessings. I know God is going to be there. I know God is walking in this with me. The reason we can do that is because we're walking with a Savior who defeated death, who took the moment that every single one of us would look at and say, you don't come back from that, and He did come back from that. His life wasn't normal, but it was blessed. And that blessing extends to us today. It extends to us right now. And so that's the hope that I give you. That's the peace that I offer you. Not my words, but the words of Jesus Christ, who says that He is the resurrection and the life. He is the one who came back from the grave. He is the one who overcomes the world. In this life you will have trouble, Earlier this week, I sent you that message of hope and encouragement. Jesus said, "But fear not, I have overcome the world. I've overcome all the problems of this world. I've overcome the diseases of this world, the poverty of this world. I've overcome the circumstances and the trials, the situations. I've even overcome death. And I'm going to walk this journey with you." I got to tell you, last night was a really sleepless night for me. A night where all the anxieties and worries and concerns had just kind of built up, and I found myself early in the dark hours of the morning in my prayer room trying to present to God what I was so fearful of. And I thought of the words of an old song, and I think He gave me these words as a blessing, as a gift, as an encouragement. One of my favorite songs, "Peace, Perfect Peace." And the second verse of that song says, "Peace, perfect peace, our future all unknown. Jesus we know, and He is on the throne." What do you do when tomorrow's not normal? Well, what you do is you trust that as long as Jesus is on the throne, tomorrow can be blessed. And what you can do and what I can do is commit today to take that next step in faith that brings us closer to Him. Wherever you are in your faith journey, whether it's just beginning, whether it is many, many years, many miles down that road, I want you to commit in these uncertain times to say that today I'm going to take the step that draws me closer to God. And I'm going to trust that even though tomorrow is very much unknown, Jesus we know, and He's on the throne. God bless you.